All right, what is up? Welcome in. It is GC Live. I'm Wes Mitchell. He is Chris Clark. Hope y'all are doing well. Man, I thought we did a show last week. Chris, we didn't do a show last week, so we had to get in, hop on, which, we've had a lot going on. We were in Nashville, had our own three publishers convention. Been a lot going on in terms of just the off the field, off season stuff for us, but happy to be back. Wanted to check in and just catch up with everyone. This show, as always, presented by our good friend, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com. Y'all know it by now, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Simply, if you're in the market for a home, hit up Clint. He'll take care of all of your mortgage needs and just walk you through what can be a difficult process and make it very, very simple for you. Again, Clint Hammond, CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com. Chris, we had our annual sit down with Shane Beamer. Always a good time. Always a number of good topics to hit, very wide ranging. I was kicking myself, man. We did not ask him his thoughts on spring games.
Yep. That was actually admission on my list, and we didn't get to it. There were a few other things that I think we could have gotten to, but we could have sat in Coach's office and talked to him for 8 hours probably. And at some point, all right, guys, seriously,
he's like, get out.
Love you. Y'all got to go. Y'all got to get out of here. But he did not kick us out, by the way. But if we would have stayed for as long as Wes and I might have, then at some point he might have had to kick us out.
Yeah, and he's always so, I guess, willing to talk on stuff that you do have to walk the line between trying to be cognizant of his time and all right, this is a SEC football coach. Don't what would you say? Don't wear out your welcome, I guess you would say. Sounds like something my grandma would say or something if you're staying at somebody's house too long. But anyway, looking forward to bringing some of that to y'all. There's already quite a bit of it on Gamecock Central. And Chris, one thing I was curious to ask him about and did so, there's already a story on GC, the new titles for Torian Gray and Sterling Lucas. And, this is something, frankly, I'm surprised hasn't been talked about a little bit more elsewhere because I do think it's somewhat newsworthy and noteworthy. I don't know that it means a ton else in terms of their day-to-day within the program, but I do think it is an excellent way and another example of South Carolina being just sort of a little bit more aggressive in taking care of their assistant coaches. We saw them make a move shortly after the season was over. How many times in the past, this was just kind of the way it was done. There's kind of that lull, and then it's like, oh, yeah, we'll get to those contracts at some point, and it's a little bit of a wait and see on who gets raises and extensions and all those things. South Carolina just very quickly said, hey, we're getting our assistants new contracts. And so they did that very quickly. Mike Furry got the passing game coordinator title on offense then. And Torian Gray, Sterling Lucas both got extensions and raises at the time. There were no official changes to their titles then, but then you fast forward to apparently in January. This never made its way out somehow, but in January, the titles were added for both of those guys, and then it became public earlier this week. And so for them, a little bit of an extension of what they were already doing, a little bit more of all right, let's let their titles match what they do in the program, but also a way of rewarding them. And frankly, let's be honest, a way of keeping guys happy when you have some other teams, other franchises, other schools, and I say franchises because there's been NFL attention for those two. When you have other people trying to hire your coaches, that gives your coaches leverage. And so you need to make sure you're taking great care of your guys that are doing a great job.
Yeah, and apparently, Mike Furry, who actually has been a position coach in the NFL before, Wes, just like Torian Gray has, Sterling Lucas has. When you do a good job at the college level, when you have pro experience as well, you're typically in the offseason going to field some interest from the NFL too. And those guys all did. So I think sometimes, Wes, titles, and we might get into this a little bit, like the whole GM title, right? We'll get into that separate conversation. We talked about that with Beamer a little bit. But, you look at some titles in some places and you're like, all right, they're giving everybody a title here. Like Tyler from 1075 was telling us that, Billy Napier has, an executive head coach, an assistant head. And you're like, what even is that? And maybe he does lean on those people heavily. I think you can make a little bit too much at times of titles if it's just slapped on there. But when we were talking with Beamer, he was pretty clear of, hey, this isn't necessarily a role shift. It's not like I'm saying, hey, I'm giving you this title and now you're going to do these things. Sterling Lucas has always been involved with what you're doing in the run game up front, what you're doing in the pass rush, department up front. Torian Gray, of course, is Clayton White is going to lean with Torian Gray's 25 years of experience coaching defensive backs in college and the NFL. Hey, what do you think about this coverage in this situation? He's going to be part of the game plan. Same for Furry, right? So it is kind of just matching, what they do. And you don't have to give them a title in order for them to do those things. Maybe they do them behind the scenes, but it is a nice resume item too for a guy that, Sterling Lucas one day, he could go be a defensive coordinator somewhere. Maybe that helps him a little bit down the road. And then, of course, those guys getting salary bumps as well. And, the days, we say this all the time, Wes, but the days of South Carolina losing guys to go other places because they are too cheap to pay or whatever, that's in the rear view, and so had a successful season. You see the salary numbers tick up for coaches. It's continued to do that. Happened with Beamer and it happened with his assistants. So I think well-deserved on the titles and raises for those guys.
Yeah. And I think, maybe there are some slight shifts, a little bit more empowerment for those two guys in terms of those titles. Like you said, and like Beamer said, for the most part, I think especially with the two defensive guys, they were already doing a heavy portion of those things. The interesting one to me was more Furry, who Beamer said, he kind of, and Beamer has been like, and y'all will see when this part comes out, incredibly happy with the job he has done both in development and that high school recruiting class at the receiver position. Obviously on paper, phenomenal, but Beamer just seeing the inner workings of how he went to work in terms of building that class was incredibly just complimentary of what he's done. But I think also wanted to empower him to have a little bit bigger role on offense with Dow Loggins leaving, with Shula moving over into that spot as the OC. It kind of maybe left an opportunity there for Furry to step into, bring some of the insights he had at the NFL level and have a little bit bigger just voice in that room, I think. And you already have a run game coordinator, obviously, in Sean Elliott. And that was interesting. Beamer had a little note about that too. It's just, look, this guy's coming to South Carolina as a former head coach, and on his own, was not let go at his prior place, comes in on his own. So he probably deserves a little bit more say, a little bit more power than just saying, oh, you're only a position coach. And so I think there's kind of an understanding there of what makes assistant coaches tick. Salaries do matter, but titles do matter as well. And maybe a guy is just slightly more hesitant to leave you if he feels taken care of and feels appreciated and feels like you're helping him and his family out. Let's say Sterling Lucas, who one day is going to be a defensive coordinator, like he will be. Maybe he's slightly more hesitant to take the first DC job, because of how well taken care of he is at South Carolina, and likewise for Torian Gray.
Yeah, you want your coaches to be in position where, like, what you don't want to hear is this guy has this opportunity, he's jumping to get more money, or he's jumping at the first, step up the ladder, And there are guys that, like I referenced the other day, the late, great Brad Lawing. Brad Lawing was pretty much just always a position coach. Like, earlier in his career, he helped out with, I think, special teams. He had recruiting coordinator title, things like that. But Brad Lawing was a defensive line coach, and that's what he was. He could have gone and been a coordinator. Like, I'm sure he had the knowledge for it, but that's what he loved, and that's what he did. He did it very well for many years. Some guys are like that. Some guys have aspirations of, hey, I definitely want to go be a defensive coordinator. I definitely want to go be a head coach. But what you want is take care of your staff to where they're not just jumping at that first opportunity as a way to skip town. I got to get out of here. They're not taking care of me. Don't like it, whatever. We know Beamer has a pretty good, work culture inside the building in terms of, not asking, obviously demanding of his guys and their time. And if you're a college coach, you work a lot, right? But not being overly ridiculous with it like some others are. Those things help. Obviously, taking care of them, recognizing their work with titles, that helps. You want your guys, if they leave for an opportunity, for it to be like, okay, nobody would turn that down. That guy's going to get a head coaching job at this big school, or he's going to go be able to be a defensive coordinator at this big school and have it make logical sense. Not, oh, he just jumped just kind of for the heck of it, right?
Yeah, so you look at this thing right now, nationally, with where the program is, you're going to have a lot of just hype going into this season. Let's call it what it is. You can look at the way too early list, the way too early playoff stuff. South Carolina has been mentioned as a playoff contender. South Carolina mentioned as, a top 10, top 15 type school at this point. And I think those are good things, but at the same time, I think there is a sense of, from a national standpoint, South Carolina has Lenore Sellers, South Carolina has Dylan Stewart, and people are ignoring. Okay, they also lost Kyle Kennard. They lost the entire interior of the defensive line. They lost their top 3 linebackers. Lost Nick Eamon-Worry, who was the guy that cleaned up everything for 3 years, in my opinion, and was just named on the freaks list, or the freak to watch list, by Bruce Feldman for the NFL draft. And so you're kind of in a weird spot if you're Beamer, just in terms of where this team is. Every team is every offseason is a little bit different, in that you have some marquee guys returning, but you have a lot of experience you're going to have to replace, a lot of production you're going to have to replace, and, Chris, a lot of leadership you're going to have to replace. And that was one thing that you asked Beamer about specifically, and that is, of the permanent captains from last year, Lenore Sellers is the only one returning.
Yeah, I mean, a lot. And look, Wes, at most years here and most years at other places, if you look at, okay, who are the captains, who are the leaders of a team, yeah, you're going to get a lot of seniors in there, right? But this, I think, is maybe a little bit more drastic than usual, in that you've got your quarterback, who was a very young player last year, obviously with what he did, fully deserved to be a captain. And it's great that you have him back with time to spare, with him being as talented as he is. But you lose so many guys. I mean, I was talking to, I think it was either Jalen Kilgore or Judge Collier told me this recently when I had him on the radio show on the Gamecock Club Hour on the Game. He said, there's only one Debo, that's a different guy. You can look at, okay, how do we replace the production and maybe some of the leadership qualities, but just the type of guy he is, that mentality, you don't really find those guys often. They're not common. So whether it's him, Tonka, who just did everything the right way, a Boogie, like guys who weren't even on that captain's list, to be frank, and then, of course, the ones that are or were, you lose a lot of leadership. I mean, 11 guys, Wes, invited to the NFL Combine, others that weren't invited to the Combine, who not only produced for you, but brought veteran leadership. And that was one reason that this team was so good. And that was one of Beamer's comments and his answer to me. Hey, I knew we were going to be better than people thought. People were just looking at us, they won 5 games last year. They won't be very good. But he knew they returned a lot. They were going to be healthier. They were going to fill some holes through the portal. They had Sellers coming in. unproven, but super talented. And all that experience was one reason he felt so good about the team. So losing that, quite frankly, is scary. You're going to have to develop some of that, throughout off-season workouts, spring, summer, preseason. Some guys will emerge. And another good point he made, Wes, some guys from the transfer class could emerge. 2 of the captains were Demetrius Knight, Torricelli Simpkins III, players that South Carolina liked, obviously out of the portal, and liked early. But those 2 ended up, I think, surpassing everybody's expectations from a leadership and production standpoint.
Yeah, no doubt. And I tell you what, man, a little interesting note here. I can't give it all away yet because it hasn't aired yet, but I actually just finished recording with RJ Newsom, who was one of those transfers, one of those O-line guys that will air on the Gamecock Club Hour presented by Cran Schooling next week, either Tuesday or Thursday. So make sure you check that out. Again, not going to give any of the rest of the interview away, but first of all, RJ, very impressive, man. Like he, Beamer talked about guys having leadership qualities. RJ Newsom, it's one conversation. My man has leadership qualities, but we were talking a little bit about last year, and the guy, I get the impression all of us looked at last year like it was a great season for South Carolina. The returners look at last year like we wanted more. And I think that is we know that doesn't win games for you, but in the offseason, you need a mantra. You need a chip on your shoulder. You need something to build from. You need something to drive you. And I think early on, that is what you're starting to see is going to be South Carolina's driving force, their mantra, what they use for motivation this offseason isn't going to be, man, that was great. We won 9 games last year. We've arrived. It was, we were 2 plays away from the playoff. We were, one big play away from winning this game, one different officiating call. Although Beamer even said to us, unprompted, they've talked about, hey, put yourself in a position where a call cannot force you to lose a game. And, I don't think he said literally force you to lose a game. That's me paraphrasing. But his point was take yourself out of a position where if you have a big enough lead or you have enough control of a game that none of that matters. And so I think that's a good mindset for a program that, in my opinion, has been better historically when they are the underdog than they have been when the expectations were high, particularly when the expectations were a little bit falsely high, I feel like, and a little bit just kind of built up nationally, maybe for the wrong reasons. So we'll see. Can you recreate what we saw South Carolina do out of the transfer portal last offseason? I don't know. None of us do. But you can see that the group, especially the returners, are very cognizant of that. And they are cognizant of how important it is to grab these newcomers and welcome them in and sort of let them know what this place wants to be all about already, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I think the point that you made about the records, and expectations coming into the season, something I wanted to expand on a little bit. We know, Wes, kind of how polls work, right? Generally, people, and it's the coaches poll, the AP poll, they're going to look, what did you do last year? And that's mainly it, right? It's like, what did you do last year? And maybe like, do you have your quarterback back? Maybe if there's this widespread knowledge that you lost all 22 starters, people might dock you a little bit. But generally, there's not this deep dive taken. That's why people didn't really like South Carolina in 24. They looked at it and said, they went 5-7, and Spencer Rattler and Xavier Luedecke are gone. They'll probably stink. That was kind of it. And we can say that's lazy or whatever, but if you're just, covering the entire country, 100-something teams, or even if you're covering the Power Four, or if you're just kind of, a casual fan that's not like, I haven't dove into every single team in the country, not even close, then that's how you're going to kind of do it, right? But here in our little bubble in Columbia, we know, all right, yeah, they're bringing back Dylan Stewart and Lenora Sellers, kind of the opposite of like what you lost in 23, where, you lost your two best players. Arguably, you bring two of your best guys back. Some may say the two best. But then you got to go below the surface and look at all the guys they lost, not just the Nagurski winner and Kyle Kennard, but team captains and all these other guys we're talking about. A couple starters three starters on the offensive line, Rocket Sanders, your snapper, kicker, and punter. Like you just keep going and going. And so that does create a situation where this team might be, forced to or confronted with some of their own positive press clippings going into the season. And they're going to have to stay focused and go, take care of business to earn whatever ranking they may have.
Well, and it wasn't just the national media last year. I don't think a lot of the South Carolina fan base itself had high expectations for that team. So, much like, and I'm not saying I thought they were going to win 9 games. I think I said 7-5 preseason. So it's, football is unpredictable, man. Like it is, especially when you have a conference like this where you're playing such high leverage games week in, week out. It's very, very hard to predict. But safe to say, South Carolina pretty much exceeded all expectations last year. But now the expectations will completely shift going into this year. And the problem with sports is people always want a little bit more. It's kind of, I saw what you did last year. Give me a little bit more. Can you add an extra win? Can you add 2 wins? Can you get into the playoff? And it doesn't stack, especially in today's college football world. So, we got all off season to talk about that, but just interesting how those things have changed. Before we go any farther, let me tell you about our friend over at My Perfect Franchise. It is owner Andy Luedecke, 404-973-9901. Contact him there or by email, andy@myperfectfranchise.net. Andy is a franchise consultant. Had a chance to meet with him recently, and essentially, Andy is going to walk you every single step of the way if you want to be a business owner, particularly if you're wanting to get involved on the franchise side of things. Like if you listen to us on the radio, we talk about Firehouse Subs all the time, for example. That would be an example of a franchise where there's a corporate owner, but you are essentially that local owner who is running the business. And what Andy does is he takes down your information. It could be stuff like frankly, how old you are, how much energy you have to put into something, how much time you have to put into something, what your financial situation is right now, what your goals are. And then he's going to match you up with franchises that he believes would be a good fit for you. And then most importantly, is going to walk you through every step of the way. So if kind of being a business owner or having a side business is something that has been a dream of yours, Andy will help you along the way. And most importantly, there is no charge to you either. So again, hit him up, 404-973-9901. Chris, speaking of trying to get into the college football playoff, for one, that thing could be changing here very soon already. I don't really want to talk about that next. I want to talk about what it might look like at the SEC level, and specifically that now I guess technically this would be tied into what does the college football playoff look like? How many automatic bids could each conference potentially have? And it would not happen in a vacuum is what I'm trying to say. But there's been some reporting, and Pete Nakos, who we work with at On3, has started to confirm some things and has reported that the Big Ten and the SEC are also looking at kind of reinventing, is the best way to say it, championship weekend into what is almost like a tournament or a series of play-in games. And in the case of the Big Ten, it would look something like 1 and 2 play each other for the championship, both of those schools would get in. You would be locked in. You're just playing for seeding and you're playing for that, for the trophy, basically. Then 3 would play 6, 4 would play 5, for example, with the 2 winners getting in. The SEC has reportedly, again, according to Pete, considering that kind of a very similar, or if not the same version of that, or even playing like a 4-team play-in situation, 8-team 4 games, I should say. Interestingly enough, Chris, as has historically happened in South Carolina, we saw this with some of those 11-win teams. Would you have been in if it was a 4-team playoff? You would definitely would have been in if it was 12-team. The Gamecocks in either of those SEC scenarios would have been playing kind of an old SEC East rival of theirs, Tennessee.
Yep.
Would have been 3 seed versus 6 seed for a right to go to the playoff. And man, that actually would have been really fun to see 2 of the SEC's most talented young quarterbacks, some of the best pass rushers in the country on both sides. I think Carolina would have been right in there against Tennessee. Like, I think that's a game that would have been heavily in the balance. Neither side maybe blowing out the other. And, ifs and buts, but kind of interesting that if this was the case already, Carolina would have been firmly in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be one of those things, Wes, that's a great point. If implemented, people will look back and go, well, if that would have been there, we would have at least had a chance, And I think it's an interesting model because we say all the time, they could expand the playoff to 64 teams, which is not going to happen, I don't think. But and there'd be this debate there'd be people on television yelling at each other about, hey, number 65, they got screwed, right? And as you expand out, that conversation gets a little less serious. When you have 2 teams, it's super intense. When you have 4, pretty dang intense. As we saw this past offseason, even within the most expanded playoff we've ever seen, how much heated discussion there was about the teams that should or shouldn't have been in. And not only that, but the seeding of said teams, all the different things about strength of schedule came up. Expanding the playoff, maybe that helps it, or it does help it, right? But giving this play-in game, I do think I'm a little intrigued by it because then you kind of, you narrow the pool some, but you say, here you go, you got to win this game. Now you would have, of course, the ability to, get an at-large bid, but to play yourself in, here's your opportunity and here's your game. So I don't know. What do you think about this? Do you like it?
I rolled my eyes at first. I don't think the playoff is ready for expansion yet, honestly. Like, we don't even know. We've had 1 season of the playoff in its current iteration.
That's right.
And we are, and when I'm just talking about I'm just talking about like college football. We are hell-bent on changing everything at once. And I don't have, I've been for the players getting paid and, player empowerment, all this. And there's just been so much change, man. Like, I do think there is danger to ultimately college football getting so far away from what it used to be that you can drive people away.
Like the overreaction of it all, right? Like even NIL, like you and I are both all for NIL, but now we've got states, no taxes on NIL.
Yeah, and it's
like, all right, guys,
that's one I cannot get behind. Like, what? Why of all people should student athletes be who we pick to say, you don't have to pay taxes? And maybe I as I say the word taxes, like, am I venturing into political? I don't do politics in our sports shows. We just don't. But they are intertwined at this point in in a certain way, to a certain extent. And so anyway, man, it's just a lot of it is just dizzying. It's dizzying to me. It's got to be dizzying to, I won't even say your casual fan, to your invested fan. Your people that are reading about this stuff, following this stuff. It is dizzying. Now, it did kind of suck that the championship games did not feel like they mattered this past season. There was something different about the championship games.
Yeah. No,
now, everybody laughed at Jim Phillips, ACC, when he said, "Oh, maybe 2 should play 3, and we'll just roll number 1 right on in there." Sounds absurd, and it is absurd. Let me. It is stupid, but his point actually is not absurd, and the one that, if you're on the video version, you can see our screen. I think having 4 games and 8 teams and 1 plays 8 and just turning it into a tournament, I don't know that I love that. But the iteration you have right here, where you could still crown a champion. So Texas would have still played Georgia 1 versus 2.
Mm-hmm.
But they're both in. So in order to do this, though, you would have to have 4 auto bids, because 1 and 2 would then get in. The winner of 3 versus 6 and the winner of 4 versus 5. That's 4 teams from your conference. They'd all have to get in.
But you know what would happen? And this just goes back to the point. There's problems with everything. You know, let's say Texas and Georgia, they're both in. Say Bama beats LSU in that scenario, they're in. Then let's say the Gamecocks beat Tennessee, they're in. Tennessee then, so there would still be, in this new model, there would be at-large bids, right? That one of these other SEC teams could capture if you're not in the auto bid.
Could they?
That's what I'm asking. This is the explain it to us like we're 5 section.
I don't know how big is the playoff that goes along with this plan?
Has that not been stated? We're just leaving it. Are they leaving it at 12 for this?
I think it's getting bigger, but
let's assume that there's another spot. Let's assume there's a possibility of at-large spots.
All right.
Tennessee's going to say, we got punished for playing a good team. We got left out. Gamecocks are a good team. They beat us. We earned number 3 in the SEC. It's really good. And we got left out, you know? So it's like, if you play your way in, like if you're already safely in, you love it, right? But if you play your way out, so to speak, you hate it, you know? So I think that model probably works best. It doesn't work perfectly. Probably works best with a further expanded playoff, because if in that scenario, if Tennessee gets beat by the Gamecocks, South Carolina's played their way in and Tennessee can still get in, you know, but there's a lot. It really will make your head spin thinking about all of it.
Or maybe you just know going in that there are no auto bids.
Winner
like,
go home.
There are no at large. Like,
yeah,
every conference is having some version of their play in, and I don't know how that math would math, but
right, but you know, in that one you had not you, but the scenario, the graphic laid out there in that, hey, if we did this last year, here's what would happen. You know, Texas and Georgia as the top 2 would have gotten in. Win or loss. They would have gotten one of the auto bids, right? if there were 4.
Yeah, well, that's the way that scenario is. 1 and 2 always get in.
Yeah.
You're not playing to get in.
Yeah. They always get in.
You're just
They
playing
play to win the SEC, basically.
You're playing for seeding, and you're playing for the trophy.
Yeah.
The banner.
That's why I think the number 3 team, if they lose, whoever that is, they'll have the biggest gripe. You know what I mean? Because they're like, we were 1 spot away from 2 where we would have been an auto bid regardless. You know? And if we get beat by 6, we're completely out. So they would actually have, you know, arguably the most at stake. Hopefully I didn't just massively confuse everybody.
But all of it depends on what are you 12? Are you 16 teams? Does the ACC, you know, because there's going to be a battle, dude. The Big Ten and SEC is saying, hey, we want 4 each. Well, do the other conferences agree to that? How many do they get? Does the group of whatever it is still have a say in any of this at this point?
Well, and I think here's one of the frustrations that I think, you know, South Carolina and other schools like SEC and Big Ten overall, they're the 2 most powerful conferences. But I think their gripe this year, and if you're a South Carolina fan, frankly, you should go along with this gripe, is what a lot of people said after that. It seemed like if you played a weak schedule and you won, that you beat out teams that played a much more difficult schedule and lost another game or 2. And there are legit arguments for both sides, right? You know, like if you go play a schedule, if South Carolina, if heck froze over and they ever played a soft schedule, which will never happen, and they played one and won every game or lost just one game, we would all be sitting here going, they just played the schedule in front of them and won. They should be in, right? You know, so it depends on your perspective. But if you're South Carolina, this is why you should like the fact that you're in the SEC, because I get the sense, Wes, that the SEC and Big Ten, being the 2 big powers, the twins there, are trying to stamp out, you know, the others, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're South Carolina in the ACC versus South Carolina in the SEC, where are your chances greater to make the playoffs? Yeah, being in the SEC week in and week out, it's a gauntlet. You're probably going to lose more games than if you played in the ACC. But by virtue of being in that conference, do you get, you know, extra spots now because the SEC is so powerful? Maybe, you know, so, and plus you can use that in recruiting. You get more resources because you have a much more favorable TV contract, whereas the ACC's top 2 arguably football schools historically, Clemson and Florida State, tried like heck to get out because they weren't making enough money. So even though it's harder to be in the SEC from a scheduling standpoint and you got to play Clemson every year, you know, you do get some benefits. So long term, like if you're a Big Ten or SEC school, you probably like where you are from like a playoff picture standpoint.
Yeah, that was part of the argument. Some of the other, I would say, people defending the other conferences were, hey, if you have the advantages of being in the SEC or the Big Ten and all the resources, you also have to deal with the disadvantage that you are going to probably lose more games. And it's up to you to like at what point is it, all right, let's just get the best 12 teams, best 16 teams, best whatever, versus we want the best, what is that number? Who knows, from each conference, and then you go play. Like there are advantages and disadvantages to every conference. And it's more of like you're just picking from each conference as opposed to picking a global 12, 16, 20, whatever we're going to end up at, and kind of go from there. So anyway, we were on that way longer than I planned, but it is fascinating. It would have been fun to play. I miss South Carolina playing Tennessee, Florida, Georgia anyway.
Yes.
I would have loved for South Carolina to get a shot at Georgia this year, to be honest with you. I think that would have been fun.
I agree.
I think the way Carolina's defense took the ball off of people and the way they got after quarterbacks and the way Beck struggled this year, I actually think Georgia would have been a better matchup for South Carolina than Tennessee, because Tennessee's pass rushers were legit. And I think, Sellers we saw could eliminate some of that, but that might have been a little more tough matchup. I think South Carolina versus Georgia would have been pretty fun this year, I think, for the Gamecocks. So anyway, all right, we got a whole off season to get into all this stuff. Coming up, we'll have spring practice right around the corner, and we'll obviously do these shows more during then, but we're gonna get on out of here, start the weekend, and Chris, we'll hop on at some point next week, right? And
absolutely, we'll do that. We will not skip a week next time.
Maybe do a little recruiting update as well. Lots of official visits have been set, some spring stuff getting set up as well, so we'll hit on all that. But appreciate all of you for hopping on here on a Friday and watching as well. Appreciate our guy Clint Hammond. Again, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797. NMLS number 71597. He is Chris. I'm Wes. You'll have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.